Okay, welcome in all of our attendees of Viet Film Festival. Thank you for joining us for the Ethereal film set. We are here with some of our amazing filmmakers, and we are about to dive into our Q&A. My name is Matt. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a VAALA board member, and I'll be moderating our Q&A today. So to start us off, we just want to be able to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. And as y'all know, VIF is an international event. So we want to just take a sec to hear, give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. Where did y'all grow up and where do you currently reside? So let me pass it over to Sally first.
Hi everyone, very excited to be here. My name is Sally Tran. I actually grew up in New Zealand. I was born there and grew up there and spent quite a lot of time in Vietnam every year, going back and forth to Saigon, where my family is from. And I'm currently in New York City, where I've been for the last 10 years.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sally. And I just realized I did not introduce where I'm at. So I was born and raised in Rosemead, California, and that's exactly where I'm at today. And let me pass it over to Julian.
Hey y'all, Julian Doan, he, him pronouns. I'm here in SoCal and I'm born and raised here. So grew up in Ventura County, Orange County, now in LA. So as I said, sort of LA adjacent, circled the drain until I ended up right here in the middle in Los Feliz.
Awesome. Thank you, Julian. And next up, we got Mark Tran.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Tran, director of Mannequin. Born and raised in Stockton, California, before I moved out to the Bay Area, where I live now in Oakland, California. I lived in a little bit in LA as well, in San Francisco, and now planning roots here in Oakland.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. And let's pass it to Sebastian.
Hello, I'm the director. I'm Sebastian, the director of Out of Time. I come from France. I grew up in the city named Logne. It's in the suburbs of Paris, near Euro Disneyland. And Logne is a city in France where we have the biggest Asian community in France. Wow, that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. So yeah, let's dive into our questions for today. So we have three main categories. One, we really want to explore the themes and inspiration, like what took y'all into the ethereal. Two, you're very meticulous with all of your process and your craft and how you put this together. So we'll definitely have time to explore that. And then lastly, questions around our community in the context as Vietnamese folks all around the world. And how that's part of the DNA of the films that y'all put together. So let's dive into our first question here. Each of the films blend reality with the ethereal. So can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to this genre? What drew you to playing with the supernatural or the surreal as a way to tell your stories? And whoever wants to share first, just go ahead.
I could start. Yeah, so I feel I think for me, the sort of liquor store portion of this film was inspired by a real liquor store I went to in down in Westminster, and I walked into this place and I saw like a bunch of locals just sitting around and they were all gambling and like drinking and hanging out, and then there was this I don't know if he's a real monk, but a man dressed up as at least in monk robes, and he was like he had like decrepit shoes on, like dirty feet, and he was like smoking, and he was clearly really drunk and like flirting with the store owner. And I thought that was like walking to that store was such like a surreal moment for me, like seeing this little community, almost like what felt like a community on like the fringe of OC or something. And so I just started thinking, and then I think having lost my own father, I have a lot of fantasies about if I could bring him back and talk to him again. And so naturally, I think the way to explore that was through the supernatural. And I think because of like that feeling I got walking to that liquor store, I started to think about, you know, this kind of surreal notion of like, would this service, what if like this service existed as something that you could buy? And then I was thinking about these people gambling, and some, I don't know, some connection came to me of like, you know, that if you were to ever bring anyone back, that would be like a bit of a gamble in itself, that like you wouldn't really know what that conversation would be like. And you know, it's like a little bit of a roll of the dice. And you know, would I want to bring my dad back? And would I be kind of, you know, questions about would I be happy or fulfilled with whatever that conversation is, you know? So that was kind of like the jumping point. And then from then on, it just became like, you know, ways to add like textual interest on top of that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was all so beautifully done. And when you say this community, like on the fringe of OC, I totally felt that when I was watching your film. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I feel like we got to go to Mark next with this question, especially with your guys' films exploring the supernatural.
Well, yeah, sure. As it's called Mannequin, the inspiration actually came from a personal experience when I first became a father, and really had trouble getting my daughter to go to sleep, which also led to me not getting very much sleep. And I think there's a weird lucid quality to your day-to-day that's hard to explain when you don't get very much sleep. And so I think combining that with the story and the main character of Min, the surreal elements in Mannequin emerges. I think it's organically coming from his internal world, in that grief and sleep deprivation colliding with isolation and memory. And so I think that's just naturally how the story is propelled by the way that the visual storytelling, and that we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make the audience feel and perceive as closely to Min's perspective as possible, in that he can't tell between past, present, or fantasy. And so, like, whether it's a long one take where you don't see the cuts and the seams between what's real and what's not, we're deliberately trying to trick each other and trick himself, for that matter. And so I think that was a fun exercise in trying to immerse ourselves into that main character's perspective. I think it even, when I originally came up with the idea of Mannequin, it wasn't even as a film. It was me actually legitimately trying to get some sleep. And at 3 a.m. in the morning, when my daughter was, not taking the bottle, I'm just like there rocking my child. And I go, what if I brought, at around 8 months, there's a concept called object permanence as well. And so that's when she starts to have, she cries because she understands that things can exist outside of her purview. And so I thought that maybe bringing a mannequin in might get me a little bit of extra sleep. And I wrote that idea down, and then it's next morning, I didn't remember why I wrote that down, and it organically became that paper napkin idea organically became a film.
I'm like terrified picturing the actual mannequin in your room that inspired that. But thank you so much for sharing, Mark. And we'll talk more about all of these films. I want to make sure to get to Sally on this question.
Yeah, so my the inspiration for Don't Fuck with Bar was in 2022, when Asian hate crimes were spiking in New York City in particular. And I was witnessing a lot of my femme peers who were sharing a lot of stories around that time, because it was 2021, 2022, COVID was happening as well. And they were sharing stories about some of their traumatic interactions with folks. And I had this you know, pretty. I had this reaction in me. It's like, oh, what can I do? Like, you know, you get really upset, and it's you know, you feel a certain way about it. And so the film is a kind of a split reality and fantasy. And I think the fantasy element, I mean, the reality is very true. It's like how we're experiencing the world and things that are happening to us. And then the fantasy aspect of it is, you know, when something bad really happens and in your mind you think, oh, if only I could do this, you know, you sort of like imagine what you could do if you had the power or if you had some authority. And so I think that's how I kind of put together the reality and the fantasy together for this film. So you look at when you watch a film, I'd like people to think whether it was real or not, you know, the fantasy aspects, and you can tell what fantasy and reality is just based on how we shot it and the colors that we used.
Yeah, hearing all of your stories and hearing that context, it just adds so much more emotional impact, like into the film, like reminiscing about it, like so empowering to watch all these women, all these baddies just come together and kick some ass, you know? So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for creating that kind of like a therapeutic outlet for us. And Sebastian, I want to blend this first question for you with the second question I think makes a lot of sense for your film. You know, want to hear about like, yes, how did you choose this sort of like surreal elements to tell your story? But also, you know, many of the stories, they're navigating grief and memory in the films. And I'm curious if there were any personal experience that shaped the way you approached your film.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
When I did this movie, before I'm in my car and I listened the music of Interstellar movie, and I always want to show how we can react when we lose a loved one and we want to resurrect them. And I want to explore the travel time, you know, but I never did that in my video. So for this movie, I want to explore travel time. It's sort of metaverse, and I want to show how we can you feel when you lose a loved one, and if what is the consequence, what when we the person he's resurrected, and the thematic I want to talk is about resilience, memory, and love. So it's a mix of all this thematic I want to explore when I did this movie, and for my personal experience, I want to do it because when I lost my mother 5 years ago, I was to do a movie about this, about this memory, about nostalgia, about I wanted to her to come back alive, So I did this movie, and like this, like, wow.
Yeah,
sorry.
and you Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I think you captured that so beautifully. Even just the old man in the home and how all of the memories were like still right there in the same room. That feeling of time travel and the lighting and everything that went along with that was so beautifully done. And I think that makes me think of Mark, your film, actually, in a similar way. And I'm wondering, you know, if you want to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah. You know, when I was thinking about grief inside Mannequin, I just kept coming back to the DABDA model, the 5 stages of grief. denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But what really stuck with me is how non-linear that process actually is. And Min, our main character, he never actually makes it past the first stage, and he's fully stuck in denial, like completely. He knows something is off. He knows Trang is sick and that she's gone, but instead of facing it, he builds this entire world around the idea that she's just away and that she's coming back. And he dresses up the mannequin in her clothes, and he puts on the tape of her singing. You really think that he's doing it for the baby, so the baby can get some sleep, you know, and that mom's home to comfort, and she's, you know, she's so central to the family. But you realize slowly in the movie when she's passed that, oh, he's actually doing it because he hasn't fully accepted that she's gone, that she is coming home for, you know, to keep his sanity intact. And I think it's heartbreaking. I think it's also deeply human for us. You know, when our back is against the wall, he's like a new father. He barely has any money. He's a refugee. He's isolated in this community. It was also during, I wrote this during peak COVID when, you know, much like what Sally mentioned about the rise in Asian hate crimes. You know, he was living in Oakland. That character was living in Oakland, Little Saigon, where there was a huge surge of Asian hate crimes. So when you're a parent, when you're not getting sleep, when you've lost the love of your life, like your back's against the wall, and like, what do we do in those moments to, and what do we tell ourselves to really keep it together, especially for like his daughter? So to me, like, Min's behavior isn't really irrational, it's survival, and like it's someone doing the best that they can when the world stops making sense.
Wow, thank you so much, Mark. And Julian, do you want to piggyback off that one?
Yeah, I love that inspiration for Mark's film, and you know, especially with the stages of grief, and knowing, you know, how deeply like your guys seated in denial. I think in Long Zong Lost, like it's like, you know, with my past film Raspberry, it's like I was very interested in like you know, being seated in just like a very, very narrow window of those stages of grief. And I think I wanted to, you know, there's a continuation of interest in that in this film, even though it's, you know, a much kind of bigger scope film than the last one. I think in this film, Jackie's character, the boy, you know, is definitely like stuck. The film explores like just the stage of bargaining, I would say, and I think there's something to, you know, I just chose these two characters, like the customer and the clerk, the store clerk, to try to kind of like explore how I think different generations of, you know, especially Vietnamese people, you know, a boy who's in his 20s and a woman who's, you know, in her like 50s or 60s might deal with these things in different ways. And I think there's like this huge gap of communication, I think, in how those generations grieve, you know. I see that a lot in like my aunts and uncles and people of the older generation misunderstanding, I think, how we you know, deal with loss or grief or just like life hardship. And I think we similarly, now in my like late 30s, I think I'm like finding it easier to figure out how the older generation, you know, to understand them. But I think when you're a younger person, you just can't see it. So, you know, I think like this film is exploring, you know, a boy who's maybe entering this world, you know, this liquor store, and essentially like an act of bringing his father back that I think maybe he's not emotionally prepared for, and which causes him to, you know, it's like really destabilizing for him. And I think for me, like it was trying to, with Hong Dao's character, I think she's you know, by the end, just like I think it's clear that she's accepted her loss for what seems like a while now, for decades. And then dealing with Jackie's character with the customer kind of like opens back up like a wound that I think she maybe doesn't want to reopen. So I don't know, there's something about pushing these two generations together that I was trying to find something, you know, I couldn't really like vocalize or put my finger on. And I think even through production, I still couldn't quite put my finger on it. But I think that's what's interesting about making films, is like you're always like trying to chase something that you can't quite vocalize or express. And and then once you start working with, we start working with Jackie and Hongdao, it's like they try to kind of fill in some gaps that I think exist in what I'm trying to say.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Julian. And to capture all these different themes that you're talking about, like different stages of grieving, this sort of intergenerational aspect, the lighting and the technical aspects all played such a huge role in the work that y'all did. And the first film I think about is yours, Sally, when I think about the lighting elements and color and everything. So, I mean, can you tell us, from your neon fight scenes to the lighting in the background and just all of those like intro elements for the different characters, can you tell us a little bit about the stylistic or the technical choices that you made?
Yeah, happy to talk about it. I think it also goes back to the first question as well, just the reality and the fantasy aspect of my film. And I think with Tao, the lead character, I wanted to create a visual journey with Tao. I wanted to have the lighting, the camera, everything synced to their emotional journey. So when they're in their reality, when things are happening, when it's bad, they're in this also a color journey where they're in red and warmer colors in the reality. And we shot all of those scenes on film just to give it more of a kind of a grittier feel. And it's all shot on handheld. So on those reality scenes with Tao, that's all handheld 16mm warm tones. And then we go into the fantasy elements. We then shoot on digital, really crispy digital, and all on sticks, like really controlled camera movement. And then the colors switch into these darker tones, blue tones, so cooler. So we go from like warm tones to cooler tones, handheld to on sticks, 16mm to digital. So we have this, visual language, cinematic language, where we're following the emotional journey of Tao. So that was the purpose of what we see when we're watching the film.
That is so cool. My inner nerd just loves to get behind the scenes and hear all of this thought and care that went into creating those scenes. Sebastian, can we pass it to you next? And tell us a little bit more about some of those stylistic or technical choices you made.
Okay. I make a 1 second shot, of 2 minutes time. And so for the past scene, we try to have neon light, with multicolor light. And for present, we chose to have just a warm scene for present scene. And I it's we try when I'm in the set, we try a lot of technical light, to try a lot of different lighting. And I don't know what with the results after this, but we tried it to if we can have emotion and understand the a mix of thematic of resilience, nostalgia, saddest scene, and memory. So when I did this movie, I don't know what is the consequence. I tried it like this, Wait, it's we try 18 take to have the good sequence. We did it in 3 hours to have the good sequence. We repeat the scene 2 hours in the morning, and we have lunch, and after 3 hours after we have the good sequence, because after it's a night in the outside, so we can continue this. Yes.
Wow. I didn't even realize, but as I'm looking back, I could see that was all one shot, you said? A single shot for the whole
Yes,
whole film.
a single shot. Yeah, a single shot.
Wow.
We have 5 technicians behind the cameraman, always to run, to hide here. It's very fun.
Yeah. Y'all are part-time choreographers.
Choreographer 3 hours, 2 hours to have the good choreography, and 3 hours to have without mistake, the less mistake possible. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's pass it to Julia next.
So it was about sort of the visual language and technique, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anything about like the technical or stylistic choices you made to bring the film to life?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so pretty much, when thinking about with this film, the sort of surreal element of it, and these back halls, these back rooms, I think the kind of immediate thing, that the immediate sort of analogy that came to me was, things like kind of like red light district, kind of like illicit. I kind of wanted to like compare this act of bringing your loved ones back to life to like going and like paying for sex. And feeling like these dark, seedy, maybe inappropriate areas that this like young boy is walking into a world that's like, maybe above, a bit above his head. So, a lot of my kind of inspiration, images and colors came from like In the Mood for Love and like Wong Kar-wai's films. In the Mood for Love especially, I think all of these like moments of longing that take place in very tight corridors and tight spaces. And then naturally, David Lynch. So like red curtains is like a motif that immediately came to mind. But off of that, obviously I think I want to use this opportunity to talk about the kind of like department heads. Jay Swen, our cinematographer, and Mochi Mengjing Yuan, production designer, and then Brianna Murphy's our costume designer. How Jay is essentially, lighting. He worked directly with Mochi, in terms of like trying to figure out the lighting in like the hallway. They kind of added these they had these ideas for like these upside down lampshades on the that like just like line the ceiling, which I thought was like, I wasn't sure if it would come across too hokey, but I thought it ended up working really well. And one thing Mochi said was like when she read the script, she kind of thought of it as like portals, and I thought that was like a really great way to look at it. So once we start outside the store, and we have this really like kind of grounded, more like earth tones color palette, and like as we go deeper into the store, the like colors start to become more vibrant, kind of like eliciting more of that surreal feel. They get like more reds, dark reds. And then as we move into the night scene, a lot of these like kind of like fluorescent, really saturated blues, trying to like amp up, I think, the emotions of the scene. And like Brianna, just with the costumes, like she just was like, I think we want to go with something really like graphic, these really like kind of simple costumes in terms of like silhouette and shape, but just something that like elevates, just slightly elevates like the whole thing to feel like slightly otherworldly. And it's like even in just Hong Dao's outfit, just like the kind of like crimson red that she's wearing with like these like color blocks on her shirt. just simple choices like that, you know. So I think for me, it was just like setting up, oh, this is just what I'm thinking emotionally, and I'm just so happy with like what all of the team brought to it, you know, with how they filled in that information.
All those pieces were super effective in creating that atmosphere, and it felt like a Vietnamese Goosebumps episode. Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah, I loved it. It was amazing. So oh wait, not yet. Let's pass it over to Mark. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. Can you tell us a little bit about the stylistic and technical choices y'all made in Mannequin?
Sure. Yeah, I also love Vietnamese Goosebumps. It's this is my world. Or else yeah. I talked a little bit about this earlier, but our North Star in our approach to making the film as filmmakers was to fully immerse the audience in Min's internal world. And how we anchored this was designing 3 distinct layers of perspective, which was past, present, and fantasy. And there were lighting adjustments that played a role in each of them. Reality, where it's grounded in twilight with cool and like desaturated tones, and kept it very dark and dim, as well as the production design, where the apartment was messy. You know, the exhaustion and the grief and the truth that Min is avoiding. So that was the bleak reality that he was in, that he was avoiding, and the fond past. So we every time we had Trang, his wife, in the scene, it was always from a memory perspective. So he always looked back at it as a fond memory, and it was always sunset. It was always magic hour. It was warm and nostalgic, echoing like the memories where his whole family felt whole, and he looked back at it with rose-colored lenses. And then we have the fantasy layer, which was not as obvious, but it was. I mean, it was very obvious. It was purple and teal, which was trying to reflect his mental state, and what he really, really, really wanted. It was his fantasy layer, and what his fantasy layer meant to him was being able to go on that family trip he never got to go on, which was visiting and seeing the Northern Lights. And so purple and teal was him bathing in the light that is the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis. And so putting these 3 pieces together, we didn't also want to overtly signal to the audience what is going on. We wanted to keep it as subtle as possible. And so even in editorial, we were trying to not signal and forecast those changes, and kept it subtle, because in a sense we were trying to gaslight the audience and trick them, not necessarily trick them, but like not make it very hard to know what's real and what's not real, so that we can follow his state.
Thank you. Sorry, I got a dog barking in the back. Did that come through?
Didn't like the answer.
Right. Well, I love the answer. Coco, you gotta calm down over there. We're gonna move to our next question, number 4. A couple films, you know, really navigate. I gotta grab Coco real quick. Give me 1 second. Different histories. And we want to hear a little bit about how you navigated those. And Sally, your film comes to mind when I think about this question. So we'll start with you.
Yeah, so the Don't Fuck with Bars is an ensemble film. So you see there's a lot of cast with dialogue. And the inspiration there was, again, being in New York City, you know, Asian hate crimes rising, and looking at what Chinatown looked like as well, and looks like for me and my experiences in Chinatown, my experiences growing up. So the film is multi-language, and I think it's a true experience to many, many immigrants as well, where you're at home and you are in the house and you speak more than one language, and you could be speaking English to your parents, and your parents speak Vietnamese back to you, and you know, there's this beautiful way where we are all communicating and not necessarily in the one language, but we are all kind of picking and choosing, but everyone understands what everyone is saying. Maybe you might not know every single word in Vietnamese that's been spoken to you, but you get it. You get it through body language, you get it through, how they speak to you, the tone. So that was a huge inspiration for this film. We're bringing in actors from various Asian backgrounds, so we're Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, speaking Mandarin, and then also Japanese. And so it was to show the diversity within, say, somewhere like New York, where Asian hate crimes are rising. So that was the inspiration, and I wanted to bring together a group who would be speaking in their native language, and perhaps you don't necessarily understand every single word that they're saying, but because they've been good friends for a really long time, and you pick it up, you can start understanding. Like when I go to Chinatown, my Vietnamese fruit store lady is speaking Cantonese, Mandarin, English, Vietnamese, like everywhere. She's just popping all these different languages, and it just all works. Like it's very harmonious. So the casting was that the script wasn't Vietnamese person or Korean person. It was a character in which then I would have to tailor for the actor that I thought was suited. So it was like an open call where anyone could come in who could speak, two languages, or English and their native language. And it was organic in that way. So we were casting for groups in the ensemble that had a chemistry that would work, and if they were Mandarin speaking or Korean speaking, that just was what it ended up being for the casting decision. So it was a very long casting process, and the languages it was a very complicated, more complicated than I thought it was going to be, but so rewarding. When I watch a film and I see all these actors come together and everyone's speaking their different languages and it just feels right and they're connected, it just brings me so much joy because I know that it was a lot for the actors to bring to the table. It was it was just a long process, and I have so much joy watching the scenes come together with the languages.
Well, thank you for all the extra time and work you put into that casting. That paid off so well. I love these people, the women just popping off on these guys in Vietnamese, and the text that y'all put up every time. It reminded me of like Scott Pilgrim versus the World, or like Kill Bill, the fight scenes. It was so cool. And seeing that cross-culture bridge happening. So thanks for all the time you put into that. We have made it to our last question, y'all. So for those, and these films explore so many different offshoots and aspects of our journey as Vietnamese people all across the world. So in this last question, we want to hear, which parts of the Vietnamese diaspora are you speaking to most directly in your film? Or another way to think about it is which Vietnamese identities or walks of life were really at the center of your storytelling in these films. So I will pass it to Julian first.
Ooh, such a big question. Maybe a bit of a messy and difficult one for me to answer. I think part of it, I guess I want to just quickly nod to is, a little bit of behind the camera. I came off of I did this film after coming off of working on the Sympathizer adaptation for about 1.5 years. And I think, where I was coming off of that project was that this is my first film in Vietnamese. This is my first film featuring Vietnamese characters. I think honestly, my first time working with like any other Vietnamese crew, to be frank. So, one kind of like North Star for me was like, I wanted to bring in, at least like a Vietnamese producer. So we got Jenny Trang Le, who's like also produced with Sally, who's wonderful. And like, I think, trying to place as many trying to just find areas where we could bring in like Vietnamese talent like as much as possible. So that was like a really big thing for me, and you know, something that I think I want to continue to work on. In terms of like the film, it's a little bit what I said earlier. I think, you know, trying to explore kind of ideas of the differences in generational, you know, just generational gaps in Vietnamese communities, between the generation who came from Vietnam and generation growing up here. I think with the customer in this film, you know, I don't consider myself a spiritual person. And in my experiences with grief, surrounded by, you know, a grandmother who's you know, devoutly Buddhist, Catholic mother and things like that. I think this film is grappling with like an understanding of the value of their belief system, something that I really struggled with when I was losing my dad. You know, I honestly like, it was really interesting to, when I was losing my dad, that like my grandmother's Buddhism actually felt really oppressive to me. Something I just think as like a Western kid, we kind of grew up thinking like, oh, Western religions are like really oppressive and like, you know, strict. And when I was going through that with my grandmother, I was like, this sort of, her Buddhist beliefs were like really oppressive for me. And I think by the end of this film, I was trying to come to some sort of understanding of like the value of, you know, Hong Dao's character having, you know, her late husband on the bangta, and you know, talking to him every night, and some sort of like what value is there in terms of like having a spiritual like safety net for yourself, like a belief system that actually allows you to deal with, you know, the absence of your loved one, you know, whereas like I think the customer doesn't have that. You know, he needs to see his father in the flesh, like he needs the physical embodiment of his dad again, and when that's taken away from him, he's floundering. You know, he doesn't have any sort of like, he doesn't have any ground beneath his feet. And then, you know, when he sees him just simply as, I think I try to leave the film with a bit of a question, you know, when he sees his father simply as like a bag of trash at the end of the film, which is just funny, dark and funny to me. But like, you know, trying to like question what, like, where does he go after this? You know, does he sort of make peace with that? Does he find like a different way in which to kind of like hold a relationship with his father after his father's gone? I'm not really sure, you know, but questions I just want to raise, that answers I don't want to give myself. And hopefully just provoke something in an audience to just like reflect on.
Yeah, I think a beautiful answer to a very big and tough question. Thank you, Julian. Sebastian, can we pass it to you next?
For my movie, I use the French language because I hesitate for a Vietnamese language or French, and I chose the French because I want to address the movie to French people and highlight the Vietnamese of France in relation to the social invisibility of Asian in France, because it's a big problem in France for Asian community about social invisibility, and I want to show we have French people with Asian origin, with Vietnamese origin, and they exist in the movie, in the cinema, and I want to highlight for this. And I decided to have just 2 or 3 sentences in my movie because I just want to show in the beginning 1 sentence, at the end 1 sentence, because I want just in the 1 second shot to show to make to the audience, just to travel with the image and sound and music, just to show these Asian French people are just being human in the country, and we and without language we are all the same, with the same people. Yes, just I imagine this for the movie. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, and you're definitely achieving that visibility. As a Vietnamese person in California, my first exposure to any kind of Vietnamese French story is through your films. So thank you for bringing that to Viet and Viet Film Fest. And Mark, let's pass it to you next.
Sure. I think the telling of this story, although it comes from a personal perspective of becoming a parent and how challenging it is, I really wanted to explore specifically the wave of refugees in the 90s. So we weren't over the top with this being a period piece, but the subtle hints and clues would make these characters from in the 90s. So the story would be placed firmly in the 90s with the technology that we see, whether it's the tape recorder or the television set. And so I wanted to speak about that specific community just because I grew up in that community as well. Although I'm born in America, my siblings were all from Vietnam, and seeing that the Vietnamese refugee community in places like Stockton or Oakland's Little Saigon, working class families who resettled after the war and built their lives in overlooked and often under-resourced communities and neighborhoods. And so this isn't like the suburban, upwardly mobile version of the diaspora we sometimes see. Rather, it's quite the opposite. And I guess the big reason for that is just seeing how and exploring like the difficulties of replanting your roots in a foreign world that sometimes can feel hostile or sometimes can feel alienating, and really adding that to the plate, which takes a psychological toll on him. And so we really wanted to just tell a story that reflects like the refugees' legacy of resilience, but also the psychological toll that it takes. And grief, particularly in this context, isn't personal, it's generational and sometimes unspoken. So when we do talk about the diaspora, the Vietnamese diaspora in Mannequin, we're talking about the people who live in the shadow of displacement, right? Those who never quite arrived and are still in many ways trying to come home and trying to make home here.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I mean, just thinking about the part of our Vietnamese diaspora you're speaking to, I feel like, Sally, yours is kind of a natural bridge to jump to.
Yeah, I mean, originally I wanted the cast to be for all Vietnamese, and I wanted it to be a very strong Vietnamese story for the Vietnamese diaspora living abroad. You know, because when the film was set in Chinatown, we shot it in New York, but it's not necessarily New York Chinatown. It's meant to be any Chinatown in the world. You know, there's a Chinatown in New Zealand. I remember that when I was growing up, and it was very small. And you know, Chinatown being in places like New Zealand is like every Asian person, you know, every Asian culture in this one little area. So yeah, that was the initial idea, is to sort of tell the story of, like, you know, Viet girl somewhere in the world who can connect to the Chinatown of their country. And so that was the idea, but then it kind of grew bigger and bigger because, you know, realizing that it's not just Vietnamese cultures within, you know, the Chinatown space. So yeah, I think that I wanted to just connect to anyone who felt like they, you know, didn't have a voice and were coming together with other folks that, you know, have similar experiences. So it is really a community that I was trying to pull together in the film and the audience. And, you know, that sort of hopefully resonated with the audience as well, which is, you know, just directly, you know, is this your story? Can you relate? How do you feel about this? And yeah, so that was the inspiration. I think it was just like a natural Like it just was the default audience. It was the default, like the story I was telling was just naturally going to go that way, which was great. You know, that was the intention for me and the audience for the film.
Got it. Thank you so much, Sally. And thank you all. That's all of our questions for this panel. Thank you to all of our filmmakers here, Mark, Julian, Sebastian, Sally, for giving us a kind of peek behind the curtain, all of the different portals that you guys helped us explore to open up these really complex themes of grief, of community, of anger, of longing. You did it so beautifully, and it feels like such a treat not to just watch those films, but to actually get to hear more about what went into making them on this panel. So thank you all so much. And yeah, for all of those who are tuning in, just know that VIF Online or Viet Film Fest Online continues until October 19th. So enjoy the films while you can, and thank you all so much for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.